Okay, y'all. Thanks for tuning back in. I'm sorry. I just, once those allergies get a hold of you, it's really tough to keep up the constant talking. Um, in the regular classroom, in a face-to-face room, you can just kind of deal with it by creating conversation and kind of adjusting along the way. I came across this. I came across this really great description in my notes that I wanted to share with you, and I don't want to overemphasize this point, but World War One changed things. It changed the way human beings thought of humanity. It changed human consciousness and made human consciousness aware of dark possibilities that, in fact, were not nightmares, but were creations brought to life by humanity itself. Let me just read you a passage here. And you remember we talked about Hemingway's early participation in the war, his being the first American to serve in an official capacity in the war due to his own adventurousness of spirit, due to his own sense of responsibility and duty, due to his own desire to accrue experience, real human experience, crisis human experience that would inform what he was discovering as his art. This is a letter from the British surrealist painter Paul Nash, Nash. He lived from 1899, same year as Hemingway's birth, to 1946. So he died fairly young, died at the age of 47. He was a surrealist. And he wrote a letter to his wife, Margaret, from the front in 1917. So this is a British soldier who is exactly Hemingway's age, and also an artist. I've just returned last night from a visit to brigade headquarters up the line, and I shall not forget it as long as I live. I have seen the most frightful nightmare of a country, more conceived by Dante or Poe than by nature. Unspeakable, utterly indescribable. In the 15 drawings I have made, I may give you these may give you some idea. I may give you some idea of its horror, but only being in it and of it can ever make you sensible of its dreadful nature or of what our men in France have to face. We all have a vague notion of the terrors of battle and can conjure up, with the aid of some of the more inspired war correspondents and the pictures in the Daily Mirror, some vision of battlefield. But no pen or drawing can convey this country. The normal setting of the battles taking place day and night, month after month. Evil, and the incarnate fiend alone can be master of this war. And no glimmer of God's hand is seen anywhere. Sunset and sunrise are blasphemous. They are mockeries to man. Only the black rain out of the bruised and swollen clouds all through the bitter black night is fit atmosphere in such a land. The rain drives on, the stinking mud becomes more evilly yellow, The shell holes fill up with green, white water. The roads and tracks are covered in inches of slime. The black, dying trees ooze and sweat, and the shells never cease. They alone plunge overhead, tearing away the rotting tree stumps, breaking the plank roads, striking down horses and mules, annihilating, maiming, maddening. They plunge into the grave and cast up on it the poor dead. It is unspeakable, godless, hopeless. I am no longer an artist interested and curious. I am a messenger who will bring back word from the men who are fighting to those who want the war to go on forever. Feeble, inarticulate will be my message, but it will have a bitter truth, and may it burn their lousy souls. No pen or drawing can convey this country. No glimmer of God's hand is seen anywhere. How, if you're an artist, if you're a painter, if you're a poet, if you're a writer, if you're a dramatist, indeed, if you're a dancer, if you're a musician, how do you communicate with an appropriate level of power the human truth of this? That's the challenge. Now, you can think of, we talked about Stein and Picasso and painting and a new form of consciousness, new ideas about human subjectivity and the relation between human subjectivity and the world against which and with which identity defines and identifies itself. And then this happens in 1914. And our writer Hemingway joins it toward its end. These are cataclysmic events for humanity, and also similarly or analogously cataclysmic events for the artist, because the crisis then for the artist becomes how to continue. How to address one's artistic responsibilities. And writers today, thinkers today, painters today, dancers today, musicians today, poets today, are faced with a similar challenge. Maybe this challenge is simply ongoing and evolves for the artist over time. Maybe you all who are interested in writing, in making music, in poetry, in novels, and dance, and so on. Maybe you are faced with a similar, analogous challenge. And this is the challenge that this then at the time 18-year-old, 19-year-old boy who grows into a writer very soon is faced with as well. Paul Nash. Okay. Well, we made it through that great story about Barney Braverman in Detroit commuting back and forth to Windsor, Ontario, smuggling copies of Ulysses. And it was Hemingway who, as I mentioned last time, who arranged for that. So Hemingway truly was with Sylvia Beach one of the heroes that made Ulysses, made Joyce possible in the United States, where his greatest, in the sense of numerically greatest, audience was. So it was hugely important, and that's why he was given that gift of the hardback copy. Okay, well, he befriends Janet Flanner, and she is the Genet, which would have been how French people pronounced her name, Genet. The French pronounce my name Jim or Jimmy. Genet, Genet. I think I included this in your list of spellings. And she was an article. She worked for the New Yorker. She was from Chicago. Went to she was from Illinois. Went to the University of Chicago. So she and Hemingway shared a background. She's lesbian, and she and Hemingway become bullfighting partners. So they go see a number of fights together. And Hemingway also becomes, significantly for us, a regular visitor at Stein's Rue de Fleurus apartment. And they discuss her writing, his writing at length. They discuss method, discipline. They discuss the work of Joyce. They discuss the work of D.H. Lawrence. And most of all, they discuss the early Cubist paintings on the wall, which we have seen and which we discussed. So that influence is transmitted. That aesthetic and that philosophy is transmitted, and that would you say that sort of the formal response, Stein's formal response to those new aesthetic and philosophical challenges is passed on to Hemingway, both through Stein as well as through Stein and Hemingway looking at those paintings together, right? And so you can start to see why we have to start with the painting, because that's a generative catalytic element of American modernism as it emerged from Europe, right? There are other modernisms emerging at the same time, right? Which that's another course, right? There's one in England and one in Germany, and one in Spain as well. So I don't want to give you the impression that there's just one stream. There are many streams, but this is an important one. Okay, and Hemingway's invited a very unusual. Hemingway's granted a very unusual dispensation here. He's invited to come by any afternoon after 5 o'clock. So, and that's very unusual. Typically, that's very unusual for Stein. Excuse me. Typically, Saturdays, right? That was when the salon was kind of open house. Stein acknowledged what she called, in quotes, this is Stein talking about Hemingway, what she called a weakness for him. And to the point, a weakness to the point that Alice Toklas got jealous of them. He writes to Sherwood Anderson, quote unquote, GS, Gertrude Stein, GS and me are just like brothers, unquote. But he writes to W.G. Rogers in 1948. I just want to read this to you. It's on page 169 in the Lynn book. W.G. Rogers is the guy that wrote. When this you see, remember me, Gertrude Stein in person. Okay, so he's essentially a biographer of Stein. It's kind of an intellectual, literary biography of Stein. So Hemingway's interviewed by Rogers. Here's what he says. This is a quote from Ernest Hemingway, 1947. I liked her better before she cut her hair. And that was sort of a turning point in all sorts of things. She used to talk to me about homosexuality and how it was fine in and for women, and no good in men. And I used to listen and learn. And I always wanted to fuck her. And she knew it. And it was a good, healthy feeling and made more sense than some of the talk. I'll just leave you with that. But something's happening in Hemingway. And I wanted to get you, if you're really interested in these issues, you have to read Kenneth Lynn's biography, because he takes on Hemingway's sexuality and the presence and the absent presence of Hemingway's sexuality in his work, the concealed presence of his, pardon me, his very complex sexuality, as Lynn would have it in his work. You have to look at it, and then you have to read Garden of Eden, which is unpublished in Hemingway's lifetime, was published posthumously with some editorial fill-ins. But it is a mind-blowing experience if you like Hemingway. I'd be very interested. Pardon me. I'd be very interested in a paper focusing on that dimension of Hemingway's world. In fact, I should say, you should clear it with me beforehand. But if people are interested in jumping off into the work of one of these authors, right, and comparing two works, or thinking about the relationship between biography, I'm sorry, allergies, thinking about the relationship between biography, in other words, the real events of the person's life, and the presence, so to speak, the symbolic presence of those real events in the literature, that'd be great. That'd be a great idea for you if you're interested, become interested in these things. And it also allows you to kind of stretch your wings a little bit in the literary sense, and become acquainted intimately with the biographies or autobiographies of these writers. Okay, there are all of the writers that we cover have had wonderful biographies written about them, and also have written in one way or another biographies, literally autobiographies, or works that are heavily autobiographical, or kind of fictional, quote unquote, fictional revisions, so to speak, of biographical of the lives they led, right? Be really interested in a paper focusing on that. Okay. So Toklas, in her jealousy, suggests that the Hemingways, Hadley and Ernest, visit Pamplona in the summer of 1923 for the bullfights, right? So, Pamplona, summer of 1923, that's the milieu for The Sun Also Rises. That's the trip that generated the fictive scenario for The Sun Also Rises. And she makes this suggestion to Hemingway because she wants him gone, because Stein, there's something happening between Stein and Hemingway. I don't mean anything that's acted upon physically, but there's a profound connection there that, as Hemingway's interview attests, that had a very intimate dimension that made Toklas uncomfortable. Okay, right at this moment, Hadley discovers that she is pregnant, despite precautions. So that's in February of 1923. And here's Stein's report, quote, "He came to the house at about 10 in the morning, and he stayed until 10 that night. And then all of a sudden, he announced that his wife was enceinte, E-N-C-E-I-N-T-E, pregnant. His wife was enceinte. And then, with great bitterness, and I am too young to be a father. We consoled him as best we could and sent him on his way." Stein's response to Hadley's reporting her pregnancy. And I always, think of this from Hadley's point of view, 8 years older, a husband, I was about to say son, a husband who, paging paging Dr. Freud, um, paging Dr. Sophocles. Imagine Hadley, this young man of a husband who clearly is ambitious and clearly is not entirely content with the domestic sphere that you have come to represent in his imagination. The marriage doesn't last long, but that's in the future beyond 1925, which is when we'll leave Hemingway's biography. But I'd be really interested in in an examination of, let me just put it in an abstract way, in an important biographical element of one of our writers' lives, such as an early spouse, such as an early partner, and approaching the work of the life through the lens of that partner. And that would obviously require a good bit of reading on your part, good bit of research, because you don't want it to be speculative. You want it to be factual, or supported, right? Supported by documented research. But that'd be a great project, fun project. And don't even worry about it if anybody's already done this. I mean, if you come across someone who's written on the same idea that you want to write on, that's fine with me. I don't care. Leave that book in the library. What I'm interested in is your ability to develop your own ideas. I'm interested in your ability to develop your own voice. And if somebody else has had the same ideas, so what? It's important for you to pursue your idea, even if somebody else has had it, and pursue it in language that you feel comfortable with, and derive the sense of accomplishment that fortifies your own ambition as a writer, as a thinker. So I would really encourage you to move in that direction. I'd be delighted for those of you who are interested in some aspect of the study of literature, interested in having that be part of your life, part of your professional life in whatever capacity, or part of your personal life for that matter. Pursue your voice. I think that's the most important thing for you. The most important thing is not to begin to think like an English graduate student who's going to write a PhD thesis. No, who knows if that's going to happen. I don't see that end as any more valuable than any of the other many ends to which all of your lives are tending, as a group. There are many ways of being an adult, many ways of achieving professional satisfaction, a satisfaction that's consonant with your soul, that's consonant with the power that you feel in yourself and the orientation you feel in yourself. Have it your way. Do it the way you want to do it. I feel sometimes that we professionalized English studies to a degree that's not healthy, to a degree that actually detracts from the power of the human power of the works we're studying. Allow that human power to resonate in you, and then respond to it, y'all, as you see fit. Okay. So we've mentioned several figures here. I just wanted to mention a few more. There's 3 other men who are very important to Hemingway's early career, right? So let's see. So far, we're looking at Stein and Beach and Sherwood Anderson, and that field begins to expand. He meets through Beach. He meets Joyce, and he meets Fitzgerald, and he meets members of the Bloomsbury group. It becomes an important conduit for him, right? And 3 other men are important to Hemingway's early career. First among them, chief among them, I would argue, is Ezra Pound. Okay, the American. We'll talk more about Pound later in the semester. Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound was a bit of an impresario in the sense that he was a great advocate for the early modernist writers, the expatriate Americans, the expatriate British people. He himself was an American expatriate from Pennsylvania. Um, he he was a constant advocate, a tireless supporter, kind of in the same way that Ambroise Vollard was the Cubist impresario for the early Cubists and the Fauves. Okay, although Pound didn't stand to make any money, you know, Vollard owned a gallery. Pound, all for the good of the literature, all simply to help. Pound's a very problematic figure in very interesting ways. We're gonna spend a little time on him a little bit later, but he was very important, and here's how. There was a wonderful little they were literally called, they were referred to as little magazines, and they were, you have to remember, the days before cable. This, you know, radio was nascent. This was very television hadn't been invented. Um, so magazines were very important, and literary magazines you would find on educated people's coffee tables. So, you know, there'd be a copy of the Saturday Evening Post in magazine form, but there'd also be a copy of what were called little magazines. And one of these little magazines was called the Little Review. The Little Review, it's a famous magazine. It was edited by Margaret Anderson and Jane Heap, two women, Margaret Anderson, Jane Heap. And they were in professional contact with Ezra Pound. I don't want to say Pound worked for them, but Pound contributed to the Little Review. He was a frequent contributor. Little Review, very, very important review in a number of early modernist, early 20th century modernist writers' work. So Pound contacted them about Hemingway and spoke on behalf of Hemingway, through. I'm sorry. Let me catch up here. Hemingway published 6 short prose pieces. You could think of them as sketches. Six short prose sketches of violence. Surprise, surprise, after that reading from Nash. Wonder why, you know, we think about post-traumatic syndrome now, we have a name for it. Shell shock was a name for it after World War I, but God, you know, when you're 17, when you're 18, when you're 19, you're not exposed to psychiatric journals and counseling. How would this affect a writer? So 6 prose pieces, 6 prose sketches of violence in the famous issue of the Little Review called Exiles. So it was a issue of the Little Review that featured American artists in exile. Okay, and that was published, that Little Review piece was published in spring of 1923. Okay, so that's very soon after Hemingway makes it to Paris. Now, Pound introduces. Hemingway also met a guy, I think through Sylvia Beach, called Bill Bird. And Bill Bird ran the Three Mountains Press. The Three Mountains Press, named for the three mountains of Paris: Sainte-Geneviève, Montparnasse, and Montmartre, right? Montmartre up on the hill with the Sacré-Cœur, where Sacré-Cœur was, Montparnasse on the other side, is sort of the southwest side of the Garden of Luxembourg, nearer to where Pound lived and where Gertrude Stein, where Rue de Fleurus was. Rue de Fleurus was about halfway south down the Garden of Luxembourg, parallel to it, next to it, I should say adjacent to it. Rue de Fleurus was perpendicular to the garden. And then a little bit farther south was Montparnasse. That's where the Closerie des Lilas was, where Hemingway wrote at certain points. Bill Bird suggested that Hemingway write a dozen more pieces like this for publication. So Bill Bird of Three Mountains Press saw the 6 short prose pieces that Hemingway published in the Little Review under the eye of Anderson and Heap, and he said, hey, more of these. And he publishes them in a book called In Our Time, famously all small letters, no capitals, which is published in 1924. Right, 1924. Okay, meantime, too, Robert McCalman ran Contact out of New York, which was a magazine, and then the Contact Publishing Company in Paris. I was independently wealthy. So he's got a publishing company that he runs out of Paris while living there, and a press out of New York. And Hemingway meets McCalman in February of 1923 in Rapallo, Italy. Now, Rapallo, Italy, important spot, because that's where Pound lived for a time with his wife, Dorothy. So Pound lived, his wife's name is Dorothy Shakespeare. Ezra Pound and Dorothy Shakespeare lived in Paris earlier, and I'll talk more about Pound later. As I said, you get these dates down. But at a certain point, he moves to Rapallo, Italy. He could speak fluent Italian. He was a linguist. He spoke fluent French and fluent Italian. He's a romanticist, and he spoke fluent Italian, fluent French. Amazingly educated guy, as well as he was educated in Greek and Latin as well. He was a college prof in classics and also a romanticist in terms of his linguistic interests. Very powerful intellect. Anyway, so McCalman publishes a book called 3 Stories and 10 Poems. 3 Stories and 10 Poems. 3 Stories and 10 Poems in August of 1923, August of 1923. So those two slightly out of order. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how that happened, but we have the 6 prose pieces published in the Exiles issue of the Little Review in spring of 1923, right? And then in August of 1923, 3 Stories and 10 Poems published by Robert McCalman through Contact, McCalman's Contact Press out of New York. And then you have Bill Bird publishing In Our Time in 1924. Okay, and that's Three Mountains Press. The out of their original presses, these issues are very valuable now. I mean, you can imagine, very valuable. Libraries, academic libraries, pay lots of money for books like this. Okay, so that's kind of the early publication history. So that takes us up to 24, right? Then Hemingway travels with Bird and McCalman, the 2 young publishers, to Spain and toured several cities, and he witnessed bullfights in each city. In the city of Ronda, R-O-N-D-A, he sees a statue of the 18th century bullfighter named Pedro Romero. Now, depending on how far you've gotten into Sun Also Rises, you may recognize that name. So then you have Toklas's suggestion coming after those trips with McCalman and Bird to Spain. Toklas suggests, hey, you and Hadley should go. So they make a July 1923 trip to Pamplona. I referred to it earlier. And they witness the Festival of San Fermin, famous Festival of San Fermin in Pamplona is the running of the bulls. And as you guys probably know, insane young people go to Pamplona to this day to witness the Festival of San Fermin and participate, as Hemingway did, in the running of the bulls. And they witness a bullfight featuring Nicanor Vialta. Nicanor Vialta, I spelled all these names for you. Nicanor Vialta, a veteran, and he loved that name Nicanor, and he professed to name his son Nicanor. Nick struck him as a good name for a fictional hero as well. Okay, so ring a bell? Well, look at Hemingway's long and wonderful series of Nick Adams stories, and Nick comes from Nicanor. Hemingway and Hadley, remember, Hadley's pregnant. During this trip, they sail for Canada. Hadley wants to have the child in a US hospital, understandable, right, for safety. And their son, John Hadley Nicanor Hemingway, nicknamed Bumby, is born on October 10th, 1923. So that takes us into the Sun Also Rises era. Good. And next time we'll talk about the book itself and its meanings. And I want to leave you here, as I will often do, with our reading, our listening from this kind of the canon of American jazz. Remember, I'm always going to try to keep you with one foot in America and one foot in Paris. These movements are happening at the same time, and jazz's development from the blues and from ragtime is happening right at the same time, and it is truly a modernist form. And I believe as the semester goes by, you'll be able to get a sense for the growing modernism of that form. So this is Bessie Smith, and the name of the song is Careless Love Blues. Let's give it a lesson. Bessie Smith, 1923, Careless Love Blues.
You ready?
Okay, y'all. Um, Wonderful stuff. That's why I sing this song of hate. Um, I should mention that that song. Uh, that's a 19. It was recorded in 23. Um, it was recorded again in 1925 by Papa Celestine, and Papa Celestine was a really important early jazz composer and arranger, and it's been recorded subsequently by Dr. John, Brooke Benton, Connie Francis, the great Dinah Washington, the great Fats Domino, Frankie Lane, Madeline Peru, Nat King Cole, Ray Charles, Rosemary Clooney, Shirley Bassey, Ronnie Lane, Elvis Presley, um, to name but a few. A hugely influential song that opened a lot of doors for that growing confluence of rhythm and blues and ragtime. They're becoming indistinguishable in jazz as we listen along here. Um, Great stuff. Okay, y'all. That's all I got, my friends. See you next time.